All right. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today for our webinar entitled Preparing for the Canadian ELD Mandate, which is presented by the Alberta Motor Transport Association featuring AssetWorks. My name is Colleen Boucher, and I'll be acting as moderator for today's presentation. We're going to go ahead and get started in just a second, but first, I'd like to say that we're very excited to have Mike Coble with us as presenter today. Mike is the Director of FSS, or Field Service Solutions, Sales at AssetWorks, and is a 27-plus year veteran of wireless mobile computing deployments and has a wide range of experience with electronic field ticketing deployments across diverse fleet-based industries. Before we get started, I just want to give everyone a quick heads up. The microphones have been muted, so if you have any questions at any time during the presentation, you can utilize the WebEx chat tool. You should all see a chat icon located on your screen, and this acts as an instant messaging tool between yourself and me as a moderator. Please feel free to use this tool throughout the presentation to enter any questions that you have, and I'll be sure to relay them to Mike during the Q&A section of the presentation at the end. With that said, I do think we're ready to get started. Mike, thank you for joining us today, and why don't you take it away? Could you be muted, Mike? It's possible. I believe that you are. Apologies, that was an issue on my end. Mike, I don't think you're muted any longer. Why don't you take it away this time?
All right. Can you hear me okay now?
We sure can. Sorry about that.
Excellent. No worries. All right. Welcome, everyone. Today we're going to be talking, of course, about preparing for the ELD mandate. And without further ado, we'll jump right in. So the things I want to talk about are the Canadian ELD mandate, the current status, the U.S. ELD mandate. What are the lessons learned? Given we've been deploying ELDs in the U.S. now for a few years, what are some of those lessons we learned from that mandate? What happened there? We want to talk about some of the pre-deployment planning steps that the organizations should be looking at. And then, of course, what are some of the roles and resources you're going to need to be expected within your organization to accommodate going to an ELD-based solution? And then finally, another bigger topic is a few tips for driver transition to ELD, some of the best practices, some of the things that we've come across in our deployment. So that said, where are we at in Canada? Well, it's under review. It feels like every month I say it's going to be a couple more months it'll be done, but we're still awaiting industry and stakeholder consultation on the ELD mandate in Canada. One of the challenges is with all the provinces involved, the U.S. just had the federal situation to deal with, where in Canada the jurisdictions are provincial and there has to be agreement across all the jurisdictions. So that's taking a little more time. And another one of the key items is there's some lobbying underway right now for third-party device certification. In the U.S., all the vendors self-certified, which had some of the challenges. The FMCSA published a 550-page compliance and test document, and there were vendors that were 60 days later claiming they were certified, which, that's probably, maybe you've filled out the paperwork correctly, but maybe you've not done all your testing and development. So the third-party device certification, I think, is a good item, and will have all the vendors on the equal playing field, and not leave it up to you, the carriers, to, have to have that trust with the vendor. Another one, there was going to be a little more lobbying for some punitive damages for aftermarket tampering. There are finding in the U.S. states, there's some ELDs still allow you to modify drive time, which is not compliant. So there's a few things, some of these lobbying items are delaying the mandate status, but they want to get it right the first time. From learning the U.S., avoid a deadline scramble. One of the challenges the U.S. had, which I hope we don't have in Canada, was the Trump factor. A lot of organizations, the election was coinciding with when the mandate was going to come down, and there was a lot of organizations said that, hey, you know what, Trump's going to get rid of this. I'm not going to worry about it because Trump's going to get rid of it. Well, it didn't happen, so then there's a massive deadline scramble. Other things, make sure your organization has that internal champion, the one that's going to drive it and run with it and make sure they are managing the ELD deployment for you, all right? And probably I'd say one of the bigger challenges, almost the same as the deadline, was understanding hours of service rules. There are no gray areas with ELDs, and this is where we run into challenges. I was in meetings where we had asked, okay, what rule set are you folks on? And 4 different people would have 4 different answers, and an hour-long internal argument would ensue. So understanding exactly how your business needs to run under the hours of service is really important, as there will not be any gray areas under ELD. All right. And of course, learning the ELD mandate is very important. A lot of it is how the ELDs work. It really facilitates the training if you can do that. All right. And just to kind of reinforce some of the lessons learned, marketing's put together a short video. I'm just going to play that for you.
AssetWorks created a short list of a few lessons we learned that we want to pass on as Canada prepares for its ELD mandate, so you don't get lost in your deployment travels. Lesson number 1, avoid the deadline scramble. There was a big deadline scramble in the U.S. ELD deployments, which was challenging for both the trucking companies and ELD vendors. Too many organizations waited until the last minute and picked a vendor that wasn't the right fit, or they missed the deadline completely. When the ELD mandate launches in Canada, make sure you give yourself enough time to select and implement the right ELD solution. Lesson number 2, choose an internal champion. Appointing someone within your organization that will be in the supporting role during the transition will go a long way. With so much change surrounding the ELD deployment, you're going to want an internal resource to manage the deployment and answer any questions your drivers or employees might have about the mandate. This role will help your organization's deployment move forward in a timely manner and let you focus on your everyday duties. And lesson number 3, ensure full understanding of hours of service and the ELD mandate. You and your champion will need to clearly understand the hours of service, or HOS rules, and the ELD mandate. It is a lot of information, and you need to be prepared to give yourself and your internal champion enough working time to fully understand these 2 items. The better you understand the HOS rules and mandate, the more organized you'll be in your deployment. With these helpful tips, you'll be ready to take on the ELD mandate. Now let's send it back to Mike for more. Take it away, Mike.
All right. So with that, what are the roles and resources you need for facilitating deployment of your ELD? So first of all, we talked about the project champion, the key person. And important with this person is you need to be able to allocate time for that. It can't just be, oh, hey, Joe, by the way, you're going to do this too. You need to make sure that they have enough off their plate so they can handle the ELD project. Okay? Again, knowledgeable on HOS ELD, and like any good project manager, able to make and enforce decisions on the company behalf. All right. So and depending on your size of your company, this person could also be a super user and a trainer. So it all depends on your size of your company, what roles you have. But you're going to need people that are super users and act as trainers. So you're going to have an administrative side. So they're going to oversee the system admin, managing the drivers and vehicles, just general administration in the system like you would with your accounting software, your dispatch software. Okay, they're going to be able to train other administration as staff changes, or business expands, and just manage the day-to-day tasks with related to the ELD system. Okay, and then on the driver side, you're going to need to have your driver trainer or driver trainers, depending on your size. So they're going to be responsible for the initial training of your drivers, plus any new driver turnover. You get new drivers coming in, they'll be available and have knowledge within house that you can manage your staff changes. And then also similar to this is driver support staff, the ability to have people that can, within your own organization, taking those frontline triage calls from the drivers that are going to have maybe ongoing support questions because they forgot something or wasn't sure how something was working in the field. So make sure you have staff involved for that day-to-day support. Right? And again, the biggest thing here is making sure your staff that you've allocated time to your staff to do these roles, not just try to fit them in on the side. Okay. Another role is installation. So, you can either self-install or you can have a third-party install. And just some of the pros and cons of that. If you're going to self-install, some of the advantages are you can be a lot more flexible in the install. You can install an ELD when your truck is into your garage for its preventative maintenance. So you can manage that schedule a lot easier. You already have mechanics, you already have space, so it's already an existing cost. You're typically not adding cost to do your own installation. Plus, when your fleet turns over or you move devices from one vehicle to another, you have all the in-house knowledge to do that. They're not complicated to install, so generally most people go this route. I guess a con of it is maybe I don't have my internal resource available, and Another con may be I'm just not getting the installs done in time. I got a large fleet, I got to get these installs done quicker, and you cannot, maybe you can't schedule that with your in-house staff and all the other work they have. Okay. So the other side is you go to a third-party installer, so you need to plan for that. So some of the advantages of that, of course, is the speed of deployment. You can install a lot of vehicles really quickly with a third party, and their personnel are experienced. They've installed a lot of this equipment, so there's no training or ramp-up time for that. Downside, maybe you can't get all your vehicles available in a short time. It's maybe tough to stop your day-to-day business so you can bring all your trucks in to be for a quick install in a bulk manner. So there's also a cost. You will be paying a third party. And then when you do have a vehicle turnover or new vehicles come in the fleet, you won't have that in-house knowledge necessarily to manage that. So some larger organizations will do a combination of both, which works really well. But again, I'd say most people do their own install. So that said, you will need installation resources, and if it's your own mechanic, you're going to have your lead mechanic that would get trained, and they're going to be able to train other mechanics and existing staff on the installation side, and they'll be the ones managing the day-to-day, the ongoing ELD installation as the project rolls out. Okay. And if you do have a third party, you just need to make sure you have your project manager is engaged in the coordination side of things. So probably less resources, but that's how you can. Those are the two options for handling installs. So some of the steps for the pre-deployment planning, you want to make sure of course you have to evaluate the vendors and products, but from the vendor evaluation, none of this is rocket science. I need to look at, hey, years in business for an organization, what's their size and stability. I think an important one though is experience in mobile computing and wireless. What we saw with the ELD mandate is a lot of app developers jumped out of the woodwork and said, hey, I'm gonna write an ELD app. ELDs are not just software. ELDs are in-vehicle mobile computing hardware. There's wireless infrastructure. Wireless is never 100% reliable. So look for a vendor that has experience in the mobile computing side as well, not just app development. Right. Of course, deployment experience, and that lends it more self to what's their project management approach, what's the training plan that you would have with that organization, what is the go-live support, do they have on-site personnel, is that something you desire or need? And then, of course, what's the post-deployment support? What's the call center? Am I calling North America? Is it overseas? So look to the post-deployment support. Of course, you have to also look at evaluating what's the right product for my organization, right? Ideally, of course, you got to meet certification and compliance. That'll be critical, and we'll learn more about that to see if there's the mandatory third-party compliance or if it'll be self-compliance testing. User-friendly, none of this rocket science. Can our administrative staff and drivers, what's their feedback like when they look at the different solutions? Important thing is a driver portal. Make sure the solution you have has some form of driver portal. If the ELD is a truck-based device that's staying in the truck, if I'm not always in the truck, I need some form of portal so I can manage my hours of service when I'm doing non-driving status or just knowing where I'm at with hours. And you also need to look at what's the right hardware platform. And I'm going to step into this next couple slides, but, do I have a dedicated, consistent device across the fleet, or am I going to do a driver bring your own device type of solution? Okay. And if you're, as you narrow down your vendors, you may want to consider doing a pilot test. It depends on, your time, resources, and comfort level. So that's, talk to your vendors about pilot tests. Okay. But from a device perspective, there's really two different scenarios. So I can do more of a dedicated rugged type device, and some of the advantages of doing that is it's going to be durable hardware. You're typically going to have less problems with it. You're going to have a lower cost of ownership over the life of the product. A big item is they're hardwired to your truck. So they're hardwired to the engine and they're hardwired to power. So the device has power and the device is connected to the engine. And it's just having a consistent platform across the fleet. It's the same operating system, the same application. It's easier to support. But a big item is driver distraction control. With a more specialized device, I can turn functionality off when their vehicle's in motion. I can not allow them to interact with it. So I can have more control over. You can have more control over what the driver's doing with that device versus, let's say, a smartphone. And then the cons, initial cost can be in a little more installation because you are putting in some cabling for hardwiring. Okay, so that's one solution. And the other kind of angle is more the bring your own device, which can be a smartphone or consumer tablet type device. So some of the advantages of that, of course, initial cost. If I got smartphones across the fleet, it's like, hey, great, it's the cost is already covered. The same with the convenience factor. It's there. I have them already. You can allow for driver preference if I'm an Android versus an iPhone guy. That gives me some driver preference. But again, some of the challenges we've seen in the industry in this type of platform is because there are multiple platforms, you don't really necessarily have control over what other software is on these devices. It's a little more of a support challenge because the iPhone may work different than the Android. I don't know what other apps you have on this device and how that's impacting performance. And one of the big challenges we've had is because it's typically a wireless interface to the truck ECM, you have to make sure the pairing occurs. And challenges with those wireless pairings and Bluetooth or Wi-Fi, that's where we've seen some industry challenges on that side of things. And of course, you need to manage power. We all have those, phone connectors that can break on those. They're not as rugged as they could be in a harsher vehicle environment. But finally, driver distraction. Again, especially in the smartphone world, you can have a lot of things run on those smartphones, and if there's an accident, you don't want to blame the ELD as causing it. So, all right. And the other thing we're looking at products is what else do I want to do? I'm putting in some infrastructure, technology infrastructure in my trucks now that can support more functionality. So look beyond ELD when you're talking to your vendors to say, hey, maybe I'm not doing this today, but maybe tomorrow I want to look at, I want to have one package that does all my GPS tracking and driver behavior, trailer tracking and dispatching and electronic field ticketing. You should be doing your driver vehicle inspection, your pre and post trip inspections, IFTA data collection. So look beyond just ELD functionality as to the different modules that may be applicable for your organization. Maybe not today, but maybe tomorrow. So then there's training and go-live planning. So you need to do this in stages. Identify that initial group of vehicles and driver. Typically a group of 5 is a good way to start. And pick drivers you know will be a good fit to help and train and promote to the other drivers. The driver word of mouth, when drivers are starting to say, hey, this is great, it's easier, I never want to go after paper, that really helps buy-in across your organization. And then build the stage rollout plan. Now, I have installation capacity as one of the items. Probably the most important thing in a stage rollout plan, if you're a large organization, is your go-live support capacity, right? You don't want to hit the big switch and have 150 drivers flooding dispatch with questions. So you want to gradually ramp this up and in a manner that you can support all the new drivers that go live and give them the chance to make their mistakes and push the wrong buttons. That's going to happen. It's a fact, but so stage that rollout plan based on your go-live support capacity. Right? And also functionality. If you are doing additional functionality beyond ELD, maybe stage that out. Get your drivers going on the ELD first, and then add the other functionality, or vice versa. Get them out going on the field ticketing side of things first, and then add the electronic driver logs. They get used to working with electronic device. So then post-deployment, right? Again, we talked about critical, having a dedicated system administrator, that's just running your day-to-day operations, just like you would your accounting and other systems. You need to make sure your drivers have some form of support contact so that your drivers are initially calling your support person to kind of triage the support requirements. Generally, vendors are not in a position to answer drivers' questions and necessarily provide guidance on hours of service compliance. If drivers do call, typically it's questions like why am I out of hours, or where do I park, and there's things that we're not, vendors are not necessarily prepared to or valid to answer. In fact, in the U.S. ELD mandate, they said specifically the vendor cannot enforce or consult hours of service compliance. So you need to really ensure you have the infrastructure in your organization to answer triage those initial driver questions. Of course, if it's a technical issue, then those ramp up to your vendor. And then from the timelines and what to expect, when you first go live with new technology across your drivers, there will be a high volume of support initially. But probably within about 4 to 6 months, you should see that all ramping down and quieting down as everyone gets used to working with the systems and the ELDs, all right? And then, helping your drivers transition to ELDs. So some of the reasons the companies who seem more successful are have a lot of communications with the drivers, and they spend time with internal newsletters or emails, and just talk about how ELDs work and what to do if there's an issue. One of the real common problems in ELDs is people just don't log in. So if I don't log in, you're going to get errors because I have a vehicle that has moved and has not been assigned to a driver. Every kilometer or mile driven by that vehicle now has to be assigned to a driver under an ELD. And you run into a lot of challenges where, I just drove it down to the mechanic, or I just drove it here, I didn't think I needed to log in. So really, training on how ELDs work really helps those drivers, okay? And if they do make a mistake, it's really good to know it's not a big deal. You can fix it. It just has to be noted. And making sure they understand it's not a big deal. And provide an internal FAQ if you can, and that's going to have your own internal. Here's the contact info. Maybe highlight a few of the common things that, hey, make sure, highlight some of the reminders, okay? And if you can, provide some rewards. If it's just a Tim's card at the safety meeting, and recognize those that are doing really well with it, and not running into errors or needing that much support. So, of course, drivers like that. And, of course, recognition always, drivers like recognition. But one of the other items is you got to keep focusing on the positives for the drivers, because there's no more manual logbook entries, and they can get rid of that manual entry. There's going to be reduced logbook violations. I mean, form and manner violations are the #1 violation. So once you put ELDs, those go away. So less roadside grief, less fines. So there's focus on the improved safety for them, accountability. When we look at some of the results from the U.S., you can see that May of last year, close to 230,000 hours of service compliance violations, and that went down to almost half in a year due to ELDs. So that's an excellent statistic about reducing those violations and associated costs and time. All right. Again, streamline your roadside checks. When you got your logs in order, you're going to fast track that. And of course, a concern of the drivers, hey, we're getting pushed by dispatch to do things beyond compliance limits. ELD really helps reduce those items, because you're fully tracked. The drivers have a bit of a leg to stand on if they're getting pushed beyond their limits. So some of the key takeaways then from today, I hope you were able to take. Give yourself time. Give yourself time to do your homework, learn what you need to do, and start early if you can. All right. Appoint roles and allocate the dedicated resources. And again, that dedicated is key. It can't just be that side job. Make sure you've given that person enough time to really dive into this project. And harping on this one, make sure you've fully learned the hours of service rules and the ELD mandate. When it's finalized, spend the time to fully understand that. It really helps in the training and the internal buy-in when you know how these things work. Okay? And where you can, involve your drivers in your process. They can be part of your ELD team, and it really helps the drivers buy in. And again, leverage your vendors' experience. Vendors have been deploying these for years and years, so ask for their help. And with that said, I think we've hit our 20 minutes here, and want to see if there's any questions out to the group.
Well done, Mike. Thank you so much for sharing that and thinking quick on your feet with the PowerPoint issues. I don't think we missed anything. I certainly learned a ton through your presentation, so thank you so much for sharing these takeaways. We did have a bunch of questions come through, so we're just going to dive right in. Any questions that we run out of time to answer, we will absolutely follow up with you directly offline. So if we don't get to your question, no big deal. We'll be getting, we'll respond accordingly. But just to start, there was a couple questions about exemptions from the ELD mandate, specifically about agricultural haulers. Do you know if Canada will be using any type of exemption for the agricultural haulers similar to the way the U.S. has? Or do you have any knowledge that you can speak up to that?
I don't think I have any what I consider 100% accurate knowledge. I mean, there are exemptions. There are expected to be some exemptions. Well, let me put it this way: if you're not required to do paper logs today, you will not be typically are not required to do an ELD. I can't speak 100% if the agricultural exemption is going to be identical in Canada or not. Like I say, we're all kind of waiting for that mandate to get finalized and released. So I guess we just have to stay tuned on that.
Okay, and so that was kind of a question specific to agricultural hauling. So then, to your knowledge, do you know of any other types of exemptions, or is that another sort of wait and see? We're waiting for the mandate to come out to determine which exemptions will be in place for the Canadian mandate.
Yeah, I mean, there's a few things, like if you're in a rental agreement under 30 days, you're going to be exempt. You don't have to put an ELD in the rental vehicle. If the vehicle is manufactured before 2000, they actually won't support it. Most of them won't support an ELD because the engine won't give you the appropriate data. So those vehicles are going to be exempt. Now, if you do have a mix in your fleet, there are ways to put an ELD in those vehicles so drivers can still track their logs electronically. It just won't be considered a full ELD. However, it'll update their driver logs appropriately if they switch trucks.
Okay. That's great information. In terms of, and we're still kind of in terms of questions that are coming in, we're along this exemption line, so bear with me. In terms of like a mileage or kilometer radius, is there a specific mandate radius that you think will carry over from the U.S. mandate? For example, within 100 miles or 150 miles or kilometers, the ELD won't be mandated or be a requirement. Do you have any knowledge to that for the Canadian side of things?
Well, just like right now, the hours of service rules will not change. So whatever mileage, as the crow flies, rules that apply today will apply after the ELD. The ELD is just a different way of tracking it. So it's not changing any of your current rule sets. It's just changing how they're tracked. So
that makes sense. Thank you for clarifying that. Okay, I understand better now. And one of the questions came in just from someone that joined a couple minutes in, so if you don't mind reiterating, they were curious if we had any firm or hard deadlines on the mandate or when Canadian companies can expect to have to meet compliance. And I know the answer, but if you don't mind reiterating just what you shared at the beginning of the presentation about where those dates are and what that status is.
Yeah, so we're still waiting the final mandate approval. There's a few items that are being lobbied for. So the expectation is that I would probably say it's going to be closer to, I'd say my guess, this is a guess today because I think I've said these dates before, 2 to 4 months from now where things will get finalized. And the expectation is there is going to be a 2-year window to deploy. There's also a bit of lobbying in to make it a 1-year window to deploy, which would make things a little tight if there's a requirement to have a third party certify it, because that's a lot of organization that has to occur. So my gut, again, given we haven't have anything inked, is that in about 2 to 4 months the mandate will get finalized, and then likely it'll be a 2-year deployment process where you need to be fully live with ELD in 2 years.
So it sounds like no matter what, companies and organizations should try to start their research early and often in terms of which vendor they want to select for compliance.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you're looking to make any technology changes in your fleets, like I say, maybe you can start with the non-ELD components and then turn on ELD as deadlines approach.
That's a smart way to think about it. All right, I have another question. Do you know, off the top of your head, if there are any very specific differences or similarities between what we can expect from the Canadian mandate versus the United States? So, for example, is there anything that we know for sure from the U.S. mandate will absolutely be the same in Canada, or specifically, different? Do you know anything off the top of your head?
A lot of it's going to be identical, and I think a lot of that is on how ELDs capture the information, how every mile or kilometer has to have a driver assigned to it. A lot of that's going to be very much identical. A few nuances are things like in Canada, for example, personal conveyance is in the U.S. that's unlimited. In Canada, you're looking at typically a 75-kilometer personal conveyance. In the U.S., it's 8 days of logs you have to provide the inspector. In Canada, you're going to see 14 days of logs. So there's a few minor things. Some of which are almost hours of service regulation changes versus ELD. So yeah, there's going to be, but given there's been a lot of eyeballs from the Canadian on the U.S. side of things. Plus, the Canadian mandate's been put together so that all these organizations that are already cross-border, already have ELDs, are not going to have to throw that technology away. That would be quite an uproar in the industry if that occurred. So they will be very similar.
Okay, well, that's good to know. We do want to be mindful and respectful of everyone's time, so we're gonna close up there. I'm sorry for any questions that we weren't able to answer. We will absolutely follow up with you directly offline. Thank you very much for joining us today. Mike, thank you so much for sharing your expertise. We greatly appreciate the partnership we had with Alberta Motor Transport Association and their willingness to allow us to talk to their audience and educate you on how to prepare for the Canadian ELD mandate. Mike's information is up on the screen if you have any specific questions for him. And Mike, thank you again for joining us today. We hope to have you with us next time.
Thank you, everyone. I appreciate everyone's time today. Have an excellent afternoon.